board. So we sent Douglas, provided Douglas with, as you can see from his memo, what I thought were the concerns. I tried to represent those concerns as I understood them, and then he responded in his memo. So with his memo, I don't know if you want to summarize that, your findings, and then you can ask questions.
Sure. Yeah. So as Mary mentioned, she said there were some concerns raised, or just questions raised about the fund having the superintendent and the board president as advisory members of the board. So I looked into if there's any concerns that you should be aware of, or I would advise you to think about. So I looked in doing that, looked at the bylaws, policies of the board, and also opinions from the New York State Comptroller. And just for your own edification, I'll give you a little footnote in what I shared with you. The Comptroller has jurisdiction not just over the finances of New York State, but also more broadly, and it evolves from having control over the finances. The Comptroller oversees local governments in the sense that if local governments are acting in a manner that's not prudent, it could be argued that it's an improper use of public funds, and the Comptroller advises on things like that, and has done that for decades. So there's Comptroller opinions interpreting the general municipal law that governs local governments, general obligations law, things like that. So issues like this, conflicts of interest for people who serve on local municipal, and I'm purposely saying local municipal boards, and that does also encompass school districts, have been issued on all kinds of things in all kinds of ways. So that isn't a case per se from a court, but it is from the New York State Comptroller, who oversees the finances of New York State, including yours. You get audited by the Comptroller. You need to adhere to opinions from the Comptroller. So that's good guidance. And the essence of all of that is there is no conflict for an individual to serve on a Board of Education and a fund, a foundation. And foundations are fairly common in school districts, some in more than others. And I think the idea behind having an advisory role from the superintendent and or a board member is so that the fund, which seeks to support the school district, does it in a way that's consistent with the school district's mission. And the example I've used more than once is you wouldn't want I live in Saratoga, the Saratoga Springs Foundation to decide we're going to give $50,000 to the Saratoga Springs School District so they can create a cricket club. No other school has cricket. Who are they going to play against? Why would we want that to happen? So the idea behind having someone involved from the school district is very, helps the fund, the people who run the fund, to guide, or the foundation to guide, and suggest what might be workable and helpful, or more helpful to the school district. And that happens in scattered places. So I can give you, countless examples of situations where the superintendent and or a board member is either on the board of the foundation or advisory to the foundation. Saratoga's a good example. Superintendent is. I think board member might be too. But more to the legal point, there is no conflict of interest. The Comptroller has specifically opined on this and said where the member of a foundation is also a board member of the school district that's being assisted, so not advisory, but actually a member of that board, of both boards. There is no conflict of interest. The recommendation from the Comptroller is that dual role be disclosed, and further, that if the individual, if the school district board member is an officer of the foundation, then that board member would be, it would be appropriate for that board member to recuse themselves from any votes on gifts from the foundation if they were an officer of the foundation. So that's not really our case here. The foundation has and I call it foundation, I understand it's a fund. the fund has advisory board president, superintendent on their board. They're not formal voting members, they're just advisory. So the idea that the controller puts out that they would recuse themselves is actually not even applicable here. He also has said in that one instance of recusal, and I didn't really get into that when I said what I did because it was really not applicable. He said the recusal would be appropriate if the code of ethics of the Board of Education would require the recusal. We don't do that, and in fact, your policy in Lake Placid School District encourages involvement in organizations that help support the school district. So I think that is a very nice crosswalk to the involvement, advisory involvement in this case, between board members, superintendent, and the education fund. So I'll stop there, but I can certainly elaborate as anybody would like.
Good question. I think they're all mine. The policy that we're looking to adopt, which talks about the district's relationship with the Education Foundation, which is a sample one from NISBA.
Mm-hmm.
In it, the wording that's included in it says the Board of Education recognizes the foundation as a separate legal entity from the school district. So the role of the school board president and the superintendent in our situation is written into the bylaws of the education fund.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I find it, how is it that the board recognizes that as separate from the school district when the participation of the superintendent and the board president are written into their bylaws? And do you have an example of another district where those roles are written into the bylaws?
Well, let me answer it first from the perspective of you being my client. I think if you want to adopt that policy in some form or fashion from the school boards, you certainly can. And I guess, as you read it, my first thought was it's maybe a superfluous. I mean, I appreciate that school boards puts it out there, but it seems somewhat superfluous because it's almost self-proving that the fund or foundation that supports the school district, like, I'm not sure the board needs to actively recognize that the foundation supports us. Of course, but if we're going to do that, that's fine. We could say that. I don't see it as inconsistent. We don't have a whole lot of control over what the foundation bylaws say. They're separate from us. We can't dictate what they do. But I also don't see an inconsistency when the roles of the individuals involved, in their case, are advisory. So
in the only language that the board has adopted, which was to support the concept of the education fund, within that, the wording talked about it being recognized as a separate legal.
No, that's fine. I mean, they are by law, definitionally, they have to be a separate legal entity. My only point is to overtly say that in policy is unnecessary because they have to be separate. But it's fine that you did that. I mean, that we recognize they're separate and they can do whatever they want.
But I guess I didn't realize when we were saying that part of it that roles for the school board were written into the bylaws, because it's.
And I would, I guess, on the side of I don't represent the foundation, say they can write whatever they want, and we don't necessarily have to be involved. They may say their bylaws, their bylaws say that members of this organization will be advisory to them. That doesn't impose that duty. You don't have to do that.
Okay. And so
I'm not being clear. I can tell that.
Well, Patty, we did. Our language came directly from the foundation in Keene, and it says they formally have that. Yeah, in my mind, if there are degrees of separation, and this, the fund is separate. They have their own board members. They determine who's going to be on their board. They are a separate entity. They're not isolated, but they are separate,
Let me,
even if we're on there as advisory
I
members.
really don't see a problem here at all. And maybe here's a simple reason why. If I was the attorney for the foundation and they asked me, Douglas, you know, our bylaws say that the board president and the superintendent are part of our organization, and they never come to our meetings, and they're totally not involved. And now they're not fulfilling their advisory role. I guess my answer to them would be, so? I mean, they're advisory, but, you know, it's not something that inhibits the operation of the organization. I think the involvement at that level makes it better because the foundation gets the insight from the school district. You know, these are things we think would be useful. But if the board president and the superintendent did not involve themselves in the foundation, I don't think there would be it would not inhibit the operation of the foundation. It may not make it as efficient because they would be perhaps guessing at what to donate money to. But I don't see that as a real problem. I would tell them I wouldn't worry so much about that. You know, do your best to ascertain where you want to put monies.
So the other part that you said, which I didn't see, was that the disclosure for the conflict of interest and then not participating, you said a board officer, but I didn't see that wording. I thought it was board and
I advised that a written disclosure would be proper. And the reason I did not include the other part was because it was not applicable. The controller said, particularly where the individual is an officer of the foundation and a member of the board of the school district, and the school district's board requires in its code of ethics some form of recusal, then recusal would be appropriate. That's not our case, so I did not include that. So that's where there was a delineation. And the point I was trying to make is this controller's opinion dealt with a situation where there was dual roles, not advisory, but actual membership were dual. You don't really have that because the fund has the superintendent and the board president as advisory to them. They don't vote. They have no, if they go to executive session, they can't be in executive session. They're not officers. So it's a part of their organization, but it's tangential. So it's not to the degree the controller looked at, and even in that case, he still said there's no conflict of interest can completely be done. I still did advise, you know, just to make the written disclosure, do it on an annual basis, keep it in a file, you know, and
so,
even that even that would be belt and suspenders in a sense because the letterhead of the foundation has the superintendent and the board president on it. So it's like every time they send it out, there's a disclosure.
So,
but you could do that anyway.
So with the disclosure that it says that then the people making that disclosure would not participate in the conversations about it, about the foundation. That if a decision comes in front of the board, then the people making the disclosure would not participate in those discussions.
Are you asking me?
That's what it says. I don't have the exact wording.
The controllers. What I'm missing.
Would I need to recuse myself
No.
from any discussion if they came and wanted to give a gift to the school?
No.
Isn't that the question, Patty?
I mean, if that's your question, the gift is coming to the schools, and the school district needs, depending on the value, you need to approve the acceptance of the gift. People can't just give gifts without you. So you accept the gift. Would you have to recuse yourself in the case of you having an advisory role? No, I don't see you needing to do that. You're advisory to them. I don't see you needing to do that. Could you? You could. I mean, you can always recuse. You can always abstain. But I do see the setup that you have as being, and Keen's a good example, very consistent. And I would venture to say, across the state, you know, our firm represents 130 districts around the state, literally all over the state. In fact, I just set up a foundation for one of our districts down on the island, and the superintendent and one of the board members are advisory members of the board of that organization. To have a, I'll call it a symbiotic relationship between the two. They don't vote, but we set one up, I don't know, 30 years ago in one of the Rochester area school districts, Saratoga. I mean, I get solicitation letters from the superintendent on the letterhead of the foundation in Saratoga. So it's very, very common.
So is there another one that it has it in the, it just seems like.
I haven't looked at the bylaws of the organizations,
I haven't,
but I'm not sure that,
I just was surprised to find that the school board's rule was written into when it hadn't been a discussion at the school board level.
Again,
Check to that, it was presented. When they presented, when the fund presented, they specifically said that.
And so, and I put that I didn't realize I had said that it should be separate.
It is separate. Does anybody else have a question or a concern?
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is any organization can write bylaws and they can say pretty much anything they want in the bylaws. This happens, involve the members of the school board. But they could say, well, in our bylaws, we want Warren Buffett to be on our advisory panel. It doesn't mean anything, really. It doesn't mean that he has to show up, and he never will,
Right.
But they can do that.
Yeah.
So the fact that that's there, I don't think has any ramifications to us as a board, does it?
no. I mean, I've established 3 foundations in the past 2 weeks, and Rick Preston's an advisory member on the whole. No, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but the fact of the matter is, as I said before, the bylaws of the foundation may indicate that the superintendent and the board president will be advisory. If they weren't asked, or if they were asked, and the people change. I mean, the position is stated, not the person. So maybe the next superintendent has no interest in being involved. That doesn't inhibit the operations of the foundation. They can still operate, they can still vote, because they're not taking away a voting member. It's just advisory. And the Warren Buffett's a great example. We're going to set up some financial organization. I want Warren Buffett's insight. Well, who doesn't? But it doesn't inhibit the organization's operation. I do suspect that, I wasn't privy to the conversation they had with you, but I suspect that the foundation thought, well, we should really do this so we're not doing willy-nilly things that don't help the school district.
I understand the relationship part. It's just that in the other ones that I looked at, the wording was liaison and not member and not advisory. That was just and that was the language that was coming in policy. So, and this is the, it's, and I guess if it's listed on, I guess if it's advisory member, to me, they're still members of the foundation. If they're listed on the letterhead and that it's recognized that they are members of the foundation. And so in it, and it is in our own policy, it does speak about membership on non-for-profit.
It is a positive, I think.
It says that there would need to be disclosure in the but this is,
Well,
it said, however, this,
it indicates that there's disclosure, and I'm reading from 2160 of your board policy that says there's disclosure of interest in matters before the board. There is no legal interest in this case.
there was another talking about a non-for-profit, but the wording that was in here was in a policy on ours, but,
Yeah, and involvement with charitable organizations, paragraph 8, it indicates a board member, officer, employee may be involved as a volunteer, officer, or employee in a charitable organization which has a relationship with the district and must disclose such relationship in writing to the district. And the board member must recuse him or herself from any discussions or votes related to charitable organizations which may come before the board. When participating in the activities of the organization, the charitable organization, the board member or officer shall not disclose any confidential information learned in the course of his or her official duties or use such information for personal interests. So, and that really is consistent with the general municipal law of any type of interest that an individual on a public body would have in another entity. I don't think this really, if you look at how an interest is defined in advisory members of the fund, really wouldn't be a legal interest as it's been defined.
So if
So,
the foundation's making, presenting a fund for the board to accept, an amount of money for the board to accept, then within it where it says the wording that you just said,
Yeah.
that they would not participate, you're saying that then they would be able to participate. So if we make the disclosure, if there's a disclosure statement made and it says we won't participate, then you're saying that that doesn't really count and that they would
And again,
participate.
again, keying in on the key language here, if a board member is a board member, officer, or employee, and that's not our case here. They're advisory. They have no voting role, they have no formal role. I understand on the letterhead, and I understand it says advisory, but there's no formal legal imposition on them as members of the fund. So that's why I'm telling you what I'm telling you. You want to be abundantly cautious, and when the board adopts a gift from the fund and have, in this case, the board president recuse herself from those acceptances, you certainly could do that. What I'm telling you is you would not be required to do that.
Okay, so the wording that you have is just different than what's
I'm looking at Lake Placid Board Policy 2160.
right. I just, the wording, it says, in the law book, doesn't
You'll forgive me,
differentiate
what are you
the-
looking at?
1211. The law book. It says that also serves on the board of a non-for-profit foundation that raises money and makes to the school district.
So I would caution you only looking at the school law book. It's a good guide.
I
No, I
it's
know.
okay. Never mind. That's fine. It's okay.
Only because like I kind of zoned in on some of the more specifics because, this is a, Lake Placid issue. I think that I always look at that because it's a good reference point. But when Roger reached out, I said, well, let me look at this a little bit more closely. I don't know, actually, maybe they did reference that controller's opinion in here. Maybe they didn't.
I mean, it's fine. I didn't just look at the law book.
Okay, no, I'm not
Other
suggesting you did.
policies
I'm not,
and I
yeah.
I looked up
I just want to know what you're reading from that.
bylaws and I tried to find other districts just to get some guidance, moving forward. Because it seemed like if our district is our district's role is written into the bylaws of the foundation, that on the district's end, we should recognize the foundation. And that's why I was hoping to have the policy, but it doesn't really match up language-wise, so.
So you're thinking about a policy perhaps that recognizes the
No.
foundation, or?
There is one for relationship with the board. That was, I would have.
Maybe a conversation with the foundation board would be a
So-
useful one if the concern is that their bylaws have that in there.
It's not really not.
Says, however,
It's
the board
concerned,
members
it's
should
mine.
not participate in school board discussions or decisions relating to the gifts from or other matters relating to the foundation. So I guess the question is, as an advisory member, are we members?
And if so, how do we get the gift if it doesn't go through the superintendent, so it just is some possible, but it's fine, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean,
It's fine, no, it's fine.
I don't know. I know that typically, you make a good point. Gifts from foundations like this invariably, they probably call the superintendent, we call Leonard, but probably call superintendent. So that is typically how, you're right, that's typically how they work. And then they have to go to the board, assuming the amount is an amount that needs to be approved.
So what, if any, is our next step? I mean, what I'm hearing you say is we're fine.
Yep.
I think Patty's raised the concern that their policy maybe doesn't address.
We don't have
We don't
one.
have
We don't have it, but I don't think we're saying we want a policy specifically for this fund to address it. I mean, we don't want to do that. I mean, our policy should be general, right, to cover any scenario as opposed to a specific.
I think you currently have a policy with respect to the acceptance of gifts, be them from the foundation or from anybody, right?
Right.
And there's thresholds that have to be,
Right.
that require board approval. So those are, and that's good because I think, most school districts do that so that you're not in a position of just randomly getting money from people. You know why you're accepting.
So I guess my question from a legal standpoint, you're saying we're fine. From a policy standpoint, do we need to do anything that we haven't already done, or is there in
It's
addition
not
to?
required.
Okay,
It wouldn't
but
be able to
okay.
present it.
Yeah, you certainly could. Your policy committee could certainly look at it and say, well, maybe we need something more robust than what we have. And I think Patty mentioned you looked at something with the School Boards Association. Frankly, they're a great source for draft policies and stuff. So, I'd be happy to look at those and tweak them as you see fit to fit into what you currently have. And
My only concern is I don't want to get involved in like a policy that's specific to this particular issue.
Yeah.
Or a policy that's contradicts the law.
Nope.
Because we can do that. Probably shouldn't, but we could. Right. And we have a policy that we want Warren Buffett to review our budget every year, but we probably shouldn't do that. So that's, I guess, where I'm going with it. So what you're saying, what I'm hearing you is that we're fine.
yeah. Now, is there an action to be taken by the board? And wasn't entirely clear about that. Has the fund given money to the board that you're contemplating, or is this just we're just clarifying some of
The fund's given money to the district, it hasn't come before the board.
It hasn't yet.
The funds have gone to the district.
The superintendent accepted it.
Good.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, if everybody.
There's no action we have to take.
No.
We listen to, okay. Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Douglas, we really appreciate you coming up. For those of you who we should have introduced you at the start, because not everybody
That's correct.
has worked with you before, but Douglas, not only is one of the attorneys we turned to in Harris Beach, a key person for our district. He answers the phone as soon as I call him. It's wonderful. But you have a history too, and that's with the Council of School Superintendents and NISBA, or is it just one or the other?
School Administrators Association, then NISCUS, and then Harris Beach. I've been in Harris Beach for 9 years. So
Douglas has been in deep in school for a number of years.
and the Adirondacks, I house on Rainbow Lake.
And you're here this
The last-
weekend, even though you
Well,
live
I
in
was here for the
Saratoga.
MASLA conference, which was just concluding today. That's the management, a bunch of school attorneys and HR people in schools around the state. So I spoke at that actually on ethics actually, and ran the golf outing today at the Lloyd Classic Club. And your timing was perfect because me and the woods on the 10th hole and the poison ivy were becoming a little too close. So.
There's no poison ivy up here.
Okay, well, then you come with me and then you can get my ball. Is that really true?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there is no
that's-
poison ivy in
So
the
I've
spot.
misidentified all these years? How about poison oak?
Nope.
Oh, Oh,
You get
good.
down into Keene, or you get to Wilmington, or
Can you
down by
excuse me,
Lake
'cause there's a couple
Champlain.
balls I gotta go.
Coyotes.
Thank you very much for coming.
Yes,
Thanks,
Really
everybody.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Safe travels.
Take care.
And I guess I'll see all of you
Yeah.
at NISBA.
Yes.
Yeah, you might be getting phone calls from your colleagues. My understanding is there's several hundred people that still don't have hotel rooms now.
There was somebody at the movies last night behind us talking about how their school board had rented a house here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I've actually told folks in my firm that they want to stay at our house, they could, because it's so tight. Anyway, thanks. I also gave them Karen's phone numbers.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Douglas. Bye.
Good night.
All right, we'll move on with reports. Leonard, you have estimated unaudited fund balance.
Yeah,
Do that.
yeah, this is estimated, I did it last, a few days ago. I know there's been a few little minor changes that, I'm working on closing out the year. I wasn't finished at the time I did this estimated, but it's gonna be close. I mean, it's the, estimated amount that we're gonna add to unassigned fund balance this year is about 170,000, so. We'll have an actual after our audit's done.
And then we have the budget status report. And since we've adopted the consent agenda, I'm wondering if we have these budget status report and the treasurer's report monthly. Leonard reads through it all. Is that necessary for him to read it through, or can we just come with questions if we have them? I guess it's what would you prefer?
I think in all the time I've been on the board, we've never asked a question.
Couple times.
A couple times, but
Couple
yeah,
times.
but rarely, so yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
so,
good with the
all right, so we have the budget status report. Does anybody have any questions on the budget status report? Then we can move on to the superintendent's report. Thanks.
You don't want to add that to the consent agenda?
Make your job a lot quicker. But no.
We like your reports.
Okay, well, I like them too. Good job. So I have a couple things I was going to talk about tonight. One is, what's going on in the Lake Placid Central School District over the summer. And then the second is sort of a continuation of what I began at the last meeting, which is to follow up with some additional end-of-year data, test results, etc. And so I'll start with the what's happening now in the school district. So, even though it's summer, we're one of those districts that's very busy in the summer. Most of you are well aware of that. But just to give you an overview of some very brief activities and events that are happening. Mr. Brunner right now is running a Science Olympiad camp this week in the school. Mrs. Moody is opening the gym for volleyball 3 mornings a week. Mr. Van Nostrum has been opening the gym for basketball. I believe it's open now. And Jan, I saw you watching the clock, so you can go over and play. Summer school classes are going on in both buildings, middle school, middle high school, and the elementary school, with a number of students and teachers and teaching assistants involved in that. We also have a number of community groups continuing to use our facilities as they do most years. So the barbecue festival was here weekend before last. Youth Commission has been here all summer long. The Youth Athletic Association, the soccer camps and baseball tournaments have been using our fields. The hospital groups and the Olympic Training Center people have been using the track. We annually support the efforts of Canadian Hockey Enterprises. This year, I believe they're using our gym, not sleeping in it. They're just using the gym. Am I right about that? Okay. One year they slept in it. The Summit Lacrosse Tournament will be happening in August, and that's always a big event in this entire community. They use our fields as well as some of the other fields. We'll have new teacher orientation in August, followed by Locker Day near the very end of August. The Lake Placid Institute will be using our buildings and our classrooms to host some of their cultural activities. The car show and the half Ironman will of course be here. That's at the end of summer. And then the one I skipped, which you can't miss, is what's happening right now on the front lawn and traveling through front of here, is the Ironman, which is happening this weekend. So here we go for that. And then on top of that, and this is something most people don't know, we have teachers and teaching assistants working on 62 different summer curriculum development projects this summer. So that's not 62 people, that's 62 projects, many of them with multiple people working on them. So we spend much of the summer with taking advantage of the time to really thoughtfully develop good ideas that we implement during the school year. And we are fortunate in that we've had some grant money to be able to rely on, to be able to pay for that. That grant money will not always be around. It's going to be one of those things that the board thinks about when we develop a budget. It's how much do we value these summer projects, because boy, do we accomplish a lot. So that's what I wanted to mention about some of the things going on this summer. And then I wanted to turn your attention to our end of year exam scores. Most of it's exam scores. So we did post in board docs this document, end of year exam scores. And some of this will look familiar to those of you who have seen my reports before, but I wanted to go through them. So the first page is the Regents exam scores from June. Okay? And what you can see is how many of our students are taking the test, and then what our results are. So for example, in the comprehensive English, CC stands for Common Core. Those are the newer exams based on the Common Core standards. We had 52% of our juniors taking that test score at the highest level from 85 to 100. We had 42% scoring 65 to 84 for a total pass rate of 94%. In the Algebra 1 Common Core, again, I'm just kind of going off to the right-hand column rather than starting on, I'm not reading from left to right, I'm mostly going from right to left. 21% of our Algebra 1 students, these are 8th and 9th graders, scored at the highest level. 63% scored in that 65 to 84 range, so 84% passed that exam. Geometry, 13% at the highest range, 64%, 65 to 84, so that's that 77% passing. Algebra 2 Common Core, 15% scored at the highest level, 80% scored 65 to 84, that's 95% of our students are passing the Algebra 2 Common Core. And I just want to hesitate for a second, because if you remember back in, I think it was May, I tried to, reintroduced the Regents exams scores from the previous year, June 2016, but I was able to also provide you with state and regional averages for comparison's sake. And I said at that time that when I talk about these June scores, I won't have those state averages. It takes forever to get those. I think we were fortunate to get them by May. But you'll also remember that our results then, and you can see how consistent they'll be in the next page, essentially in all or almost every area were at or above the state averages. So there's no exception here. We're not seeing any dramatic changes, but again, that's on the next page. So the global history and geography results there, 72% passing. U.S. history, 79% passing. The earth science, and we only had 20 students take this test because of that shift that you know about with the science, the order of taking these classes. But 80% scored in the highest range, 20% for a passing rate of 100% total. Living environment, you'll see a much higher number taking those, right? Because the kids who now we're taking living environment first as opposed to earth science first. You have 84 students taking the living environment test, 92% passing. Chemistry and then physics, chemistry at 11, both of them at 11% in the highest range, and then chemistry passing rate of 78%, and physics 55%.
Do you know the numbers for next year as far as enrollment in the classes? Because the Algebra 2 number was low. Maybe earth science is explained because of the switch, but do you know going into next year if this was just a fluke year and it's low, or if that's...
So we know I don't know, I didn't bring those numbers, but yeah, we know those numbers. If you look at the historical, this page has little tiny, I know how much you like tiny print. But this can let you know, again, what kind of trends we're seeing. So for example, at the top, the first set of test scores are passing rates. That was really the second number I was telling you. And then the bottom set of scores is the mastery rates. That's 85 to 100. That was the first farthest on the right-hand side. Now, what you can see there is a number of areas. I think you'll see consistency. Sometimes it's a little bit up and down, and in other areas it's progress. So at least when you're looking at the outcomes. So the English Common Core, 94% passing rate. That's what it was last year. The year before that was 80. The year before that was 87%. So you can see how that works. The Algebra Common Core passing rate, 3 years ago, 2 years ago was 64%. Last year was 88%. This year is 84%. Somewhat consistent. You can see the geometry rate. Again, sometimes we have a little fluctuation. It was 86% 2 years ago, 69% last year, and 77% now. So you can use this to just sort of gauge, how we're doing over time.
It seems like earth science is up in both those. So can you give any credence to the switch?
So say again. So what was that?
The earth science seems to be higher. Seems to be at its highest level in many years. So can you give credit to the flip?
Well, you can give credit to the flip, but here's what the flip brought about. So the flip brought about our students who entered this class as high achievers, and many others. So we don't have high achievers in other classes, but many others taking the biology class, and then we'll take the year of science next year. So I'll go out on a limb and say we might not have 100% next year, but I could be wrong. The tests also changed, but over time they're generally pretty consistent, especially once they've been developed. They've had a couple of years to sort of iron out the bugs. Anyway, I'm not going to go through them all. I wanted to make sure you have this information. Any questions on the historical? Okay. So we're going to go on to the college entrance exam summary. So if you were to read the Syracuse newspaper, the Buffalo newspaper, you would see there are articles right now which are talking about school districts and their SAT scores. It's one of those stories that tends to make the papers. They are looking at the 2016 scores. So I'm sharing with you are the 2017 scores. They also, and I will say this, we calculate our averages just a little bit different than you're probably going to get out of the College Board, and it's a perfectly reasonable way of doing it. I think it's actually the most accurate way, but you won't always see the exact same numbers. So you see a little bit off here and there, but essentially this is big news right now, statewide, and so I'm sharing with you right now probably the first glimpse at how our graduates did this year, because this is the first time we've really summarized them. So, and there are some high numbers to take into account. So for the first one right there, the percentage of seniors taking college, any college entrance exam, that 87% has got to be 20 to 25% higher than any previous year. Our students in large numbers took either the ACT or the SAT this year. That doesn't mean they absolutely needed it. Matter of fact, I did notice by looking through all the students that some students who are attending a four-year college next year didn't take either one. So some of those that 13% didn't, because you don't have to, because entrance exams are, college admissions can be test optional in some places, but we still get a high percentage of our students who are taking these tests. The SAT is still the favorite, 62% to 42% for the ACT, but that 42% is very high for New York State students. You can see over on the right-hand side, in 2016, on average, 29% of the state, 29% of all high school students, high school seniors took the ACT. In our school this year is 42%. So our students are taking these at high rates compared to past years, and compared in some cases to the averages. But as far as what the scores are now, this is the first year you see the SATs reverting back to just 2 subscores, not 3. We were always 2, and then it went to 3 for, I don't know how long, 15 years. And then this past year, this group of seniors is the first group that's coming out with just 2 scores deep. It's really not reading, it's English, reading and writing. You know, it's a little bit different. That's just my abbreviation. And then about 500 being average, but I gave you the actual averages over on the right-hand side. But our students, the SAT reading score 588, and the math 568 this year for a combined average of 1156. The English is 23.4, the math is 22.9, the reading is 25.4, the science is 24.2. The composite, and that's the average of all of them, is 23.8. Nationally, that composite on average is 20.8, so whereas it's 3 points higher than that. For the ACT, 3 points is a really significant difference. And again, it's not just, we don't just have 5 or 6 kids taking the ACT, 42% of our seniors took the ACT. So these results are overall positive results, and I think they really speak to the college preparation for our high school graduates, class of 2017. Any questions about the college entrance exam summary? Last one, AP exam scores. Right, so it's this page, and you've seen this before if you've been here at this meeting every summer. I'm providing you the overall AP exam scores, and I'm going to just highlight 2. So you see the class on the left-hand side. You see the total exams in the kind of in the middle in a big wide column, and you see the Lake Placid average. So just to give you a sense of how this works, for the AP results, a 5 is the highest score, a 1 is the lowest score. 5s and 4s tend to be the scores that colleges use to give credit to high school kids who did well on these exams. Sometimes 3 also. So 3, 4, and 5 are generally seen as pretty successful. If you want to compare something a little bit more specific, you can look at the national and state averages on the right. But our studio art group, we had 4 students sending in their portfolios for an average of 3. In our English language, it's the 11th grade AP English class, we had 12 students this year, scoring an average of 3.08. For the English Lit, that's the 12th graders, 13 students for 3.39. U.S. history, we saw a drop this year. We've seen that in other years with other tests. In this case, and you can see over the historical, which is the graph below, that AP history typically has been in the 4s and mid 3s. This is really the first year we've seen it at 2.75, which is where it is right now. Statistics, you know that story. We have not offered statistics this year, or no students took the test because we didn't have the full year class. Biology, 9 students took the test, 3.11 average. Environmental science, 10 students took the test for a 3.60 average, and that's getting back to the high averages we had 4 or 5 years ago. Calc, you remember this story, we have not been teaching AP Calc specifically. We did have 1 student take the test. I did not report that score because that's very handy, very public information about 1 particular student. Physics, the physics mechanics section, these are the same students. The AP took the physics mechanics are the same. We took the electricity and magnetism, average of 3 in the mechanics, and average of 2 on the electricity and magnetism. And then I try to provide you with the historical so you can see over time. And then down below, if you can see a very fuzzy thing, I don't know why it's fuzzy. We have also been tracking our AP participation. And you might remember that last year, one of our things that we were tracking was we were trying to open the door wider to AP classes. And not only did we actually make some changes so that the door was open wider, but we saw results to that. So in 15-16, 78 students participated for just under 81%. That was much higher than the past. We did see a decline this year. We did not close the door to AP enrollment this year, but we did see a decline in those students who chose to go through those wider openings. 65 students, 64%, which is, again, higher than 2 years ago, higher than 4 years ago, about where we were 3 years ago, a little lower than where we were last year. But that was a number that the board was tracking to demonstrate or to to evaluate success in openings of the doors wider. So I hope I didn't overwhelm you with numbers, but I want to make sure you have them. And these numbers do become public at some point along the way. Well, they're public now from us, but they become public in other venues, the state report cards, the newspapers report the SAT averages, all those kinds of things. You saw it first. So and that's all I have for you tonight. Any questions or comments from me?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Information for the board, there's a couple things that were added there. One is Karen updated the committees. We have the objectives, she listed the objectives. That's something that next meeting in August will go to the part of the meeting as a work session to continue to work on those. She also sent that out as a Google document if you want to start making notes in preparation for that meeting. That's available now too. And then in this convention, let's see what that was. That's just their schedule.
It was just a reminder that people, the only person that said they were not going was Heather. I'm gonna sign everyone up.
Questions?
When you're signing everybody up, is that for everything on Thursday or just from 3 o'clock on for the NISBA conference?
So I've never gone. Do you just go to what you wanna go to during the day?
Yes.
Because I thought, looking through the schedule, that the 2 courses that they're offering that day were extra.
Right,
Law
the
seminar and
Yes.
the communication workshop are extra, right?
So typically the first day starts later in the day,
Like 3
with
o'clock.
the keynote kind of in the evening,
Go to the
right?
reception.
And then the last day ends early.
Okay.
I went to the law conference today in Latham, and they were very excited about the speakers they have for the law conference, for the conference. Just,
For this conference.
Communication.
yeah, I just got
Yeah, I
information on it.
Yeah, I saw that.
Karen, everybody.
I'd kind of like to go to that. I'd kind of like to go to the communication one. And I know Rick would like to.
That's the one you emailed me about.
Correct.
Does
Did you
anybody
approve it?
else wanna go to one? What?
Did you approve it?
Did I approve it?
Anybody have any objections to that? Does anybody want to go to the pre-convention law seminar? On thinking agenda items.
The Google Doc invitation, where did it go?
To your Lake Placid CSD.net Gmail account,
The Gmail account.
When?
just today. Do you remember I sent you all emails about your new Gmail account?
Yeah, last week.
So today I sent,
I can just check.
Thinking agenda items to go as an objectives.
Number 2, of course, the education. That- that
Roger's report, right? Action items. It's got a couple. Creation of non-teaching staff positions. It's the only action item that we need to take action on. So the proposed action, it reads, upon recommendation of the superintendent, create 2 new teaching assistant positions beginning with the 2017-2018 school year. Is there a motion to approve this motion?
Oh,
Is there a second?
Awesome.
Ms. Chen. Is there discussion? Not then, please vote.
Where's that coming?
do you want me to tell me? I'll vote for you. Yes?
Motion carries 6-4, 0 against with 1 person absent. us to adjournment. So the next meeting,
So do the consent agenda?
we already did that, we did that at the beginning.
So I did not add in special education for the consent agenda
Oh, it's listed.
at the top. Is it listed at the top?
It's listed at the top.
Okay, so I'll just go back and fix it.
Okay, thank you. So the adjournment, the next meeting is August 15th at 6:30, with the possibility of a meeting of an August 22nd meeting at 6:30. That's only if needed, but put it on your schedules just in case. On the agenda topics, we have the Wilmington bus run. Roger's preparing a report for the August 15th meeting on that topic. Are there any new agenda topics? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Thank you, Jeff. Is there a second? Thanks, Joey. All in favor, please say
Are the,
aye.
I'm sorry, Leonard just pointed out that the action items, item number 8 on the agenda, is that part of the consensus?
Sports merger was, budget transfer was, board member
Okay.
conference
Yeah,
was,
okay, yeah,
special
yeah.
education, all
All
of
right.
it was, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all in favor of adjourning the meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed say no. Motion carries, 6-0 against. Thank you all.
Karen, in my usual state of things, logging clouds, I was just looking through, see your emails, you sent it out today.
Did you do the LPCSD.net? You have to log into that email.
It's different than the LP, it's a different one.
I can't take this. It's just, get another account.
And another password.
It is, it's not the LPCSD one.
So if you go to like the Google Chrome,
Fridge before I left.
Yep.
It's Google Docs, right?